Dan and I just met with the rating agencies earlier today to give them a picture of the state of the city as it relates to our financial situation and how we're going to balance the $42 million budget gap that is before us. So, you know, we're trying to paint as positive a picture as we can. However, you know, with declining revenues, it's a hard picture to paint.
So here's the dilemma we face. Nobody wants to cut police. Cutting cops.
Well, remember, we went before the public and said, we're going to get to 803 for the first time in the history of Oakland. We did that. We got beyond 803, right? So our effort was to get there. I now understand that there's empirical evidence that information material that's showing that the Oakland Police Department is one of the most overstressed and overworked agencies for a city of this size in the country. So at a time when we were saying we needed to at least get back to the 803 mandated by Measure Y, and number two, that there are experts and researchers out there saying that your present police force, even at that number, is overstressed. Now we're saying we're going to have to go down. So that's the dilemma you're talking about.
Right, so here's one of the bizarre things that we're facing. Okay. And it has to do with the way that Measure Y, which is the Violence Prevention Initiative 2004, is written. Measure Y says you must fund 739 officers outside of Measure Y in order to be able to collect tax revenues to fund Measure Y. That's 63 officers, $6 million in violence prevention money, and $4 million to fire. So if we want to lay off one officer for any budget saving reasons to contribute to reducing the deficit, that one officer will then cost us the $20 million in Measure Y. So if we lose the $4 million in fire, since we can't cut fire, it's going to have to come from somewhere else, presumably from police. Police cost basically 6 officers per $1 million, so that's another 24 officers. So if we lose one officer, that's 87 officers out the door before we save $1 in the general fund. So if we're going to save any money in the general fund, all officers that count for savings are beyond the 87. So for example, if we were going to save $20 million, what we'd have to do at 6 per million is lose 120 officers, in addition to the 87 that don't save us any money, and that's how you get to 207. And that's the logic of why, even to save 20 million of the $42.7 million, you'd lose that many officers.
Okay, let me back up so we can explain. The figure 739 that's written into the Measure Y that says you have to budget for 739. And you have to budget that out of the general fund. That triggers these other Measure Y monies.
That's right.
Cutting those officers that are funded by Measure Y doesn't help us with the deficit because that's not general fund money, that's Measure Y money mandated by the public.
That's correct.
So you're saying that even if you cut one officer or several officers that take us below the 739, all of that deteriorates, it goes away, like
$20 million disappears.
It just disappears. 63 problem-solving officers go away. The $4 million to the fire department goes away. How do you get that other number that takes us, when you said 70-some? You said 24 additional officers?
Well, you get the 24 is the fire, the $4 million in fire.
Oh, I see.
That we can't get from fire because we can't reduce the number of sworn firefighters.
I'm understanding. So that if we lose the $4 million from Measure Y that goes to the fire department, you've got to replace that $4 million to the fire department, and in order to place that $4 million, you have to lay off 24 police officers. That's how you get
That's right. So rather than wanting to lay off police officers, which everybody agrees that be a crazy thing to have to do, other than the fact that it might be necessary for budget reasons, that what we've been talking about is going back to the voters and saying, look, this is the situation. You can save this. You can approve a parcel tax or some other revenue measure that would raise somewhere in the vicinity of $24 million, And that would solve a lot of the problems. And then Measure Y could be saved, and then police wouldn't have to go out the door. The particular dilemma we face right now is the election's not until November, and the budget has to be determined now in June.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Is there any way to punt to November, crossing your fingers that the voters say we recognize the dilemma that you're in, and well, A, is there a way to punt to November? And let's say best case scenario is that the voters go, we see the problem, we pass a tax measure. Let's say worst case scenario is we punt to November, keep the police officers there, praying that the voters in Oakland will pass it, and they don't pass it. Tell me what happens in either one of those.
Okay, so can you punt?
Yeah.
Yes, you can punt. And if you punt and you win, and you can pass a parcel tax that's sufficiently large to address the problem, then you can punt successfully. If you punt and don't lay off, let's say, 180 officers in July, and don't get the parcel tax passed, then you have to make up all that money you spent, including all the Measure Y money you spent, and you have to make it up in the remaining 6 months of the year. So that would mean, instead of laying off 180 officers in July, you'd have to lay off 360 officers in December in order to make that up for the remainder of the year, and then you'd be back to laying off just 180 officers.
Your revenues would be short because you wouldn't be able to collect that parcel tax because it would fail.
So let's go through the numbers again. The shortfall is $43 million. If the parcel tax doesn't pass, you still have the general fund shortfall of $43 million. What Dan was also referring to, if you continue spending the Measure Y money, and you have gone through half of the year and you spent half of that budget, let's say $10 million, and none of the measures pass, then on December 1st, you have to start laying off officers. That means
Because you have to put that money back into Measure Y?
before I get there, so
Okay.
on December 1st, if you start laying off officers, you lose Measure Y. So that's $10 million on top of $43 million in the general fund. You're dealing with a $53 million deficit in a 6 months period. So that equals a $100 million deficit annualized. So that's what we're dealing with.
So that's the pressure if you don't win in November.
Right.
So you take the gamble.
It is a gamble because you'd lose the opportunity in the first 6 months that you would have achieved in savings if you had started making reductions as of July 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year. So it's a gamble. One of the ways in past years that we've sort of managed similar situations is through land sales, but I'm not sure what our store of land is at this point, what our assets are. Maybe our cupboard is bare. We may not have the land sales. And as Dan has said in prior sort of meetings that we've had, this is not a good market to be selling assets.
Right.
This is, values are down. There aren't a lot of buyers out there, and might be fire sales. So we may not get sort of the value that a property would be if we were at sort of a stronger point in the market.
Well, let me ask you this. In the past, sometimes you folks have been able to come up with great magic, one-time solutions. Have we run out of one-time solutions?
One of the sort of go-to solutions has been to transfer transfer as much appropriation, applicable budget to other funds. And we can do that.
Tell me what that means.
Other funds, for example, if there is an eligible expense perhaps in libraries that really could go from the general fund to Measure Q, that would be sort of where we could see some relief for the general fund. But there, we may be near exhausting that point for several funds.